Hi everyone, I'm Mark Smith, Lead Product Manager here at IDBS, kind of specialize in process development. I'm also the kind of value stream product owner for inventory, request, PIMS, and product control as well. I've been at IDBS for knocking on 5 years now. Prior to this, I was at Lonza Biologics, where I implemented our ELM product back in like 2011, something like that. So I've been a kind of a user of this for a long time, lots of experience in informatics. Today I'm going to kind of talk about process knowledge and AI. We've got the safe harbor statement. Read it at your own kind of pleasure, but we'll kind of skip through that. I think when we talk about AI, it's full of buzzwords, right? It's one of these. I remember being in around the world when we first did blockchain. I was telling this story to a couple of people last night, and every kind of senior manager came along and says, "Oh, we need to implement blockchain into our life cycle." And you look at them and go, "Well, but why? What are you doing it for? What's the actual kind of question you're trying to ask of it?" "Oh, it'll be great, everything will be secure." And I say, "Well, I can just take the label off the final product and move it onto another product, and I've broken the blockchain. So what do you want me to do it for?" And we're getting kind of similar thing with AI at the moment. It's very much in the hype cycle of, "Oh, we need AI. But yeah, what are you going to do with AI?" And so what I'm going to kind of start, first of all, I'm going to just go through a little bit about what AI is in general, and then kind of try and break it down from this big amorphous, "Hey, look, isn't this cool, it's AI," to actually what is it and how can it kind of impact the organization things. AI in itself, at the highest level, is the theory. It's the science. It's the how am I going to do it? What is the idea? It's the learning. It's the kind of subject of ultimately mathematics, really. Machine learning is basically where we start writing algorithms, but instead of me writing an if statement and telling the system what to do, I start letting the computer kind of decide what it does itself. I'm going to give it some information, and I start classifying different things, and I'm going to let the algorithm sort of pick out what features it deems to be important and how it's going to then kind of classify and recognize them in the future. This is really kind of some of the earliest stages of AI. It's used across the board. We actually used it for classifying cell images in cell line development at Lonza Biologics quite a while ago. So we had a system taking images of cells, and then it was basically counting them and then seeing if there was reflections and trying to do single cell monoclonality, for example. And then you've got deep learning, which kind of takes this kind of pattern of, here's some features I'm going to kind of recognize, and it starts to feed that through what starts to look like a neural network. So you start kind of getting this pattern of, I've got one kind of neural net that I'm waiting, and I'm kind of trying to let it make decisions. I'm passing that on to the next stage, and the next stage, and the next stage. And it's here that we start to get into a little bit of a black boxy, because it's a little bit at this point where actually the algorithm is starting to do things more and more complex, and we're starting to understand less and less of what it does. It's kind of used a lot of time in analyzing medical images, and also kind of AlphaFold uses something like this. It sounds really cool, but ultimately when you boil it down, it's actually still just linear regression done hundreds of thousands of times across the board. Then we've got generative AI. So generative AI is the kind of the new big buzzword. So the kind of the biggest difference between the two is way we get to deep learning. These are all kind of what you would class as classification models. So it's you give it an input, and I'm going to give you an output. I'm going to give you a picture, and I'm going to tell you what's in the picture. Generative AI starts to kind of flip that on its head. It's basically, I'm going to give you a phrase, and I want you to generate kind of what potentially the input was. So we start to use this in kind of designing kind of novel drug molecules and things like this. This is largely kind of where you see things like DeepSeek and ChatGPT. So using like those diffusion models and large language models and things. This is where we're getting into kind of generative AI. And then last but not least, the main one that's kind of in the hype cycle at the moment is large language models. I think everyone kind of uses these nowadays. Everyone uses Copilot or the GPT model or a Claude model. They are very good in kind of doing what you need to do in life and helping you to translate your ideas into other kind of formats. But ultimately, at the end of the day, they're the world's best search engine. And we're going to go on to that because about how these things are trained and about how you can then kind of utilize them in your science and things. So at the moment, there is some uses for large language models. They're not used a lot in our industry, and I think we'll start kind of seeing some of the first ones coming through will be in very kind of simple tasks, such as, we'll see some automated reporting. We got people in the audience right now who are doing some really cool things with generative AI automated reporting, receipt handling and things like that kind of come out of this as well. But I still think we're a little bit away from this being mainstream in our industry. And so how does an LLM work? So in essence, you give it loads of information. You give it loads of text, right? And it converts that text into like tokens, which in essence are kind of numbers, that are kind of vectors that the algorithm can understand. And then we use something called a transformer to basically take those vectors, mathematically compute in a large matrix how they relate to each other, and then we store them in a vectorized database. And the vectorized database, in most cases, I think in some of the frontier models, they're kind of 16,000 vectors large, which as a human who can kind of process 3 dimensions or 4 dimensions, trying to think and trying to imagine what a 16,000 dimensional space looks like is largely impossible for myself. But it does that, and what it's trying to do is it's kind of say that each vector that you're moving through has some relationship, and that's kind of what we're going to try and do later. And one of the things about this is, as it reads the text and as it kind of puts these things together, it takes the meaning from the first word and then basically puts that into a vector database and then adds the meaning to the second word and the third word and the fourth word and the fifth word. So as you have longer and longer sentences, it no longer looks at what your original sentence was saying. It starts to look, it puts all of the meaning of your sentence into the last word of the sentence. So as you have larger and larger inputs, the context that you have at the very beginning of your sentence is lost the larger and larger your input is because of the way the system works. So in order to show this, I think I did i3 back in like 2012 or something like that. That was my first one, and I did it as a customer. So I've been presenting at these things for quite a while now as an IDBS employee. And I've never done this, so this might end my presenting career because I'm actually going to try and get some audience participation. So I'd like to introduce Ken here. So Ken Foreman is a product manager for the same value stream model, and he's also a product manager for kind of manufacturing technologies. We are going to attempt to train a large language model, a really simple one, a really small one, but the theory exists, right? So what we have on the board here, next to Ken, is our vector space. So we have whether the language tone is neutral to positive, and we have whether the technical tone is neutral to specialist. And I've put some starter words on here so that we've prepared for this. So you've got things like to, or you, yes, and, start, for example. What I'm going to ask you to do is imagine you're a baker, and basically, I want you to shout words out. And Ken is going to play the role of the transformer, and he's going to plot your word onto our vector space. So do we have any volunteers, first of all, before I start picking on people? Run. Pick a word. Cake. Where are you going to put it, Ken? Right, we need another word. Chocolate. Yeast. Butter. Now, needless to say, when you're doing this with an actual computer, it's a little bit quicker. Mix. Mix. Measure. Yeah, mix, measure. Jam. Eggs. Flour. Hey, this is going better than I thought. Okay, about 5 or 6 more. Muffin tin. Yeah. Yeah. Tin one word or is muffin tin? It's fine. Underscore it. That's how we do it, isn't it? Temperature, I heard as well. Temperature. All right, 2 more. Birthday. Birthday? Birthday? Yeah. An oven. That's fine. Most large language models learn like a 4-year-old. Right. So, congratulations. We've trained a large language model. What we've done there, in essence, is exactly how OpenAI train their large language models, just to the nth degree more. So instead of having 2 dimensions, they've got 16,000 dimensions. Instead of having 20 words, they've got 1.6 billion words, or something like that. So you can sort of imagine how much better it is, and that's why I'm going to say this in the right way, that's why it appears to have knowledge, right? And then to prove that, what we're going to do next is we're going to actually try and answer a question. So we're going to try and answer the question, what is the best way to make a biscuit crispy? Right? So if we start in that bottom corner, Ken, you can pick any of those words in that bottom corner because you are now the transformer that I'm asking the question to. So I want you to circle a word in that bottom left-hand corner to start the answer to this question. What is the best method to make a biscuit crispy? So in the bottom left-hand corner, pick a word to start. Yeah. There is no correct answer. You've got to get the most likely. Yeah.
Well, these words aren't up here.
That's fine. Start.
Let's go with start.
Okay. So now, what the algorithm is going to do when you're asking it the question, now it's going to kind of plot its course through this vector space in order to answer the question. So it's going to pick we're going to start at start, and basically we're going to pick a direction of kind of tonality. Now I'm asking it a question about biscuits, so we're going to kind of ask it something specialist, and I want it to be positive because I want to make it crispy, so that's a good thing. So we're kind of going to come in this direction through the vector space. So what I'm going to say is, actually, we start here at start. We now have a choice kind of in this direction. We have a choice of 2 words. We've got butter and measure. I'm going to ask the audience, who votes that the next answer should be butter? Okay, who votes that the next answer should be measure? Okay, I think the next one is measure, Ken. So draw a line between that and measure. Right. Now we're going to keep going in this direction. So now we're kind of coming through here. We've probably skipped oven. We're going to get to mix and flour. Next answer, who votes mix? Okay, who votes flour? I think it's probably flour. Yeah. So flour. Right, so now we've kind of come in here, and now the next answer is eggs or birthday. So who votes eggs? Right, I think that wins. We've got eggs. Right, so we have a rubbish model, and we have a rubbish data set, and the answer to the question, what is the best method to make a biscuit crispy, is start, measure, flour, eggs. It's just, it's all right. But it hasn't really answered the question, has it? And that's ultimately because, we didn't have a good training set. So, all of the power of the large language models that we're kind of looking at really rely on how good your data set is in your model in the first place. So, if you've got a good vocabulary, if you've got limited vocabulary, you get limited sentences, you get awkward sentences like this. That kind of direction, the directionality through it, depending on what, if we picked another direction, we could have had a completely different answer as well. So it's all kind of really reliant on all of this. So LLMs don't think, so how we kind of go, I'd like an answer to this question. It doesn't think about the answer to the question. It just statistically predicts what word will follow the previous word you've asked based on its 1.6 billion parameters and 16,000 vector spaces. So what does that bring us to? So that brings us to using these things in our industry. I'm going to kind of go back to the big frontier models now. And, we'll kind of speak sort of OpenAI models and things like that. They're much better than this. It's just to be perfectly clear, they are much better than this. And you can ask them questions. But they're not specialized to you and your organization. They've been trained on kind of the internet of all the things. So we have to kind of be able to add context to these models at the point of use. because if I ask a large language model a specific question, I'm going to get an answer based on the internet. I have to be able to ask it something of use. And there's a few ways to kind of do this, and sadly, in the last kind of week or so, there's been some really interesting kind of papers released, and I haven't got these in the article. But the first is really around RAG, which is it's a term called retrieval augmented generation. Now, this is where, at the kind of the point of run, not necessarily in the prompt, but from an algorithm's perspective, it exists within the prompt space. What you do is you give it additional context. So in this case, when we kind of asked it this question, how do we make a biscuit crispy? I could have also gave it a load of instructions about how I've baked biscuits in the past. And it could have added those words to the space at runtime and then answered the questions based on that. So this is really good because it allows you to add information really quickly. It can also access up-to-date information really well as well. There's no need for kind of model retraining. You can kind of use this sort of off the bat. And it can kind of work with large data sets. And obviously, GPT-5 has now been optimized for RAG as well. I think some of the necessarily negatives on this is can be slow because it's got one thing, it's got to parse all that information that you're giving it. And depending on the length of your input, you obviously get less, as we stated before, the longer the sentence, the longer the prompt you're giving it, the less meaning the data has the less meaning at the earlier stage actually gets through to the prompt itself. But this is a really kind of good way. It's a very common way for organizations to supplement their large language models. Secondly, we have fine-tuning, which is kind of what we would do here is we'd go into this model and we can say, oh, well, we're talking about biscuits, so let's take the cake and actually tweak that into biscuits and sort of move it around in the space and make it biscuits. And we'd sort of take the model and sort of just fine-tune some of the parameters, but we're still using the core aspects of the frontier model in essence. It is good because it produces much faster responses. The data is in the system. And you can customize it for your domain, but it's not always up to date because if you then get new data, you then have to fine-tune it and you have to kind of keep it up to date in that way. It does obviously requires retraining. It is expensive to do, much more so. And again, it's dependent on the data quality as well. So everything's kind of coming back to the sort of the data element of it. So to kind of show what sort of fine-tuning does in this aspect, we just kind of created this scenario where we're going to ask a fine-tuned LLM to do we're basically going to ask an LLM to do a specific task. The quality of your data, the volume of your data, all of this matters. So I'm going to ask a question, create a process description with associated CPP and CQAs for an IgGM running in our platform version process 3. And GPT-4o at the time kind of created this, which if you read it, is actually a really good answer to the question, right? If I was a university student and I was asking the question, create a generic process description with associated normal CPPs and CQAs for a standard IgGM full stop, right? Because it knows nothing about what you as an organization are doing. It doesn't know what your platform process is. It doesn't know anything about the molecules you've used. It doesn't use anything about your risks associated with your CPPs and CPQs and things like that. So this is this is what's possible when you actually pre-train the model as well. So when you give it some of the data. So instead of just giving you something really generic, well, let's do this. It's actually kind of based it off your stuff. So based on the previous 11 examples of an IgGM being run over the last 4 years inside of your organization, using the standard version, these are the CPPs and the CQAs I would predict because of your data. So this is really about how do you take these frontier models and how do you take the things that are kind of coming in the organization, like Copilot, and start adding organizational context to them. And so where does a system, if you're going to do that, where are you going to get the data from, for example? So we've got some historical experiment execution data at the top here. We've got some process parameter design data kind of in the middle. We've got some risk data. Again, we've got some parameter result data, and then we've got some product result data. So your historical execution data, we're just going to kind of frame that. So we kind of group these together. So we've got experiment data, process data, and product data, ultimately. And your experiment data, as we've kind of seen a lot today and over the last couple of days, is normally it's inside of your ELN. It's in kind of some system. Might still be paper, but nowadays, there's a lot of systems actually, a lot of organizations that be in a Word document or an ELN document kind of thing. Your product data, probably in a LIMS, or if, in our inventory system, more preferably, but it's probably in some kind of product-focused system. And this is, I've been speaking for half an hour, and I think this is where I get to the actual title of the talk. But it's the process data. Where's your process data, right? Where is the information about, well, what are you actually making? We know what you're making, but where's the information about how are you making it, right? Normally, inside of a lot of organizations, that could be in an Excel spreadsheet, could be in Documentum in a DMS system as part of a process description, for example, but it's not traditionally kind of digitally accessible in this way. And another thing to kind of bring out on here as well is, traditionally in M4Q, Jim, correct me if I make sure I get this right, in M4Q, the first revision, when you decided what your CPPs and the CPQs were, you basically just had to propose that, right? And that you could, as long as you could justify it, it was fine, right? But in revision 2, which has been released, I think, or has it just been drafted? It's just been drafted. In revision 2, they're changing that from a, hey, what are your critical process parameters, to, hang on a minute, why are they your critical parameters? So you can't just kind of put your submission into your BLA anymore with an example of, hey, I've got my CPP is pH at 7.2. It's no, why is it 7.2? What experiments went into deciding that? What's the risk associated with your pH? How much of your design space of your molecule do you actually understand? So we're going to kind of see a shift in regulatory submissions as revision 2 comes out. As organizations and regulatory authorities are going to want much more data to justify the decision-making behind something, not just the result of those experiments itself. So if all of your process data is currently on paper, how are you going to get that into your data warehouse, for example? And so obviously your ELN, we can map data straight into a data warehouse. For a LIMS system, we can map data straight into a warehouse. If you've got systems on paper, you need a process to get that into the data warehouse. It needs to be, could be manual, just to get someone to transcribe it all in. You could also actually create a large language model to read the paper documentation and then input it into the system. But then we're in this kind of loop cycle again of, well, how do you've got to train that and then make sure you validate that and keep that up to date. So that is possible, but it's in there. But as we've been talking about in some of the posters around the days, you can use something like our system where the polar control module, the newest module we have, is entirely designed for all of this process execution steps. It's basically designed to capture what are my parameters, what are the specifications associated with them, what's the criticality of them, and how does that change over time. And that is linked and works with all of the other kind of solutions that we have. I'm going to bring this back to the kind of the lab loop that Scott spoke about on the very first day. Is the lab loop is migrating away from just being single experimental execution. I've got some samples, I'm going to do some dilution, I'm going to connect to a piece of equipment, I'm going to get some results, to being the next level up. I'm going to design my studies. What parameters do I need to test? What's my study design? What experiments am I going to perform? How am I going to analyze that? And how that cycle repeats on itself to keep your specification updated, to keep you in line with the regulatory expectations, so that when they ask, you can kind of go in the system and say, hey, for pH, we did all of these experiments. This was our design of experiment. These are the experiments we did. This is the justification for why we've set pH to whatever variable you've set to. And this is an incredibly quick demo. And it's going to kind of try and show that. And it's going to try and bring a lot of the things you've seen over the last couple of days together. So we're in control here. We got some kind of process descriptions. And we're going to kind of add some stuff. You can map these to catalog terms and things, so you can connect them up automatically to the ELN, to the Explorer system, to the ELN system. As we go through, so here we've got some parameters with units and classes and things like that. I can add new parameters as I go. We can decide what it is. We can map canonical terms, so you can kind of keep that data dictionary going. We can assign the classifications. And then once we've kind of defined our process description for each of the different kind of unit ops, we can then go in and add some specifications. All of these kind of things are configurable, so whether it's an action limit or an alert limit, whatever limits and that kind of things you've got, whatever your classifications you have, that's all fine. The structure of this, again, is configurable. You can configure it to comply with like ISA, is that how you say 90, is it 88? ISA 88 kind of standards. or whatever kind of hierarchical structure you have inside of your organization. It's all audit trailed. When you change a specification, that's audit trailed. It's all version controlled, so you can kind of propose specification updates in time and keep that audit history going. We're then going to go into DOE. We're going to bring those parameters into DOE. It's going to design us an actual experiment to test what it is that we want to test. We want to control pH. We want to maximize cell growth. We're then going to go into the spreadsheet. So Matt kind of showed this earlier. So we're kind of going to the spreadsheet, and this time we're going to bring in the kind of the unit operation that we're looking at, and we're also going to import the DOE as well. So we're kind of bringing those two things together to create this study design. So we're going to bring in the DOE results as well. So now we've got the study design in here. What we're going to kind of do now is, as a kind of probably a project lead or a product lead, I'm now going to kind of look at this and go, so how do I design this fully? What experiments do I need to perform? What are the running ranges? What are the things that I need to control? What are the things I need to vary as I go through my whole study? Again, I can add kind of ad hoc parameters at the runtime as well. So this is the full study design that I'm kind of going to go test. I can then, once I'm happy with this, as kind of Matt showed in much more detail earlier, we can take all of this and then we can create a request from this, where in essence you have one request for the study you're doing. So if I'm doing a process characterization study, or I'm doing a method development study, or a validation study, I can have one request for that full study. And then each of the jobs within that study is actually something that a scientist actually execute on. I can then drag and drop those things around a timeline to say I want to assign this experiment to this person to be done on this day, for example. It'll catch up with what I'm talking about. So yeah, we're going to push to request here. And then once you've got everything in request, you can then actually control it from a kind of a work management perspective as well. So instead of just having experiments lingering around and kind of have to figure out, well, actually this experiment was for this and this experiment was for this and there's no linkage. Now I can look in my request system and say, well, I had this process characterization study. These are all of the experiments I did for it. And these are all of the samples that I used or were generated during this process characterization study. And this was the DOE that I kind of designed my experiments from. And this was the specifications I started. So we're now kind of bringing all of these things together so that you can see it and you can make your submissions easier. Once your scientist is in request and they've been allocated that request, I don't need to go in and create anything from scratch. I can kind of come into request, click the button that I'm going to execute it, and it will create me a record inside of the ELN with the correct experimental workflow on it for you to execute on. I can then, as a scientist, execute on this. So in this case, I'm doing importing some kind of bioreactor data and things. So again, this is kind of what Matt showed earlier with the linkage of those spreadsheets to the study designer. You can see all the parameters have been pulled through. You can let your scientists go away. They can execute on this. I mean, this is process characterization demo, but the same theory exists if this was a specificity study or if this was a linearity study or any kind of other study, BioA type study where you've got different parameters that you need to test at different times and things like that, stability management and things. So where are we now? We're going to explore. So now we're going to kind of execute on it. And I think we're just kind of going to import some data. And then once your scientists have kind of done all this, and you can track all of this through request as well. So as it's being executed on, the status within request will kind of change to now I'm in progress, now I'm completed. So you can kind of see the status, and there's some nice visuals on the wall here of kind of the sort of the work management of it. It's a nice donut ring that kind of says you've got this many experiments still outstanding, for example. So we got some bioreactor data in here. This should just kind of keep going. Once all of our scientists are kind of done, because of kind of where Matt was talking earlier with the data mapping and things like this, all of the data from these things has now been sent to the data backbone. So now we've got all of that kind of process experimental data in the backbone. We're going to go back into Insight. We're going to load our analysis tool up for the Insight module. And it's going to import that data from the backbone into it. And it's going to analyze it, and it's going to actually tell me from my DOE design which of my parameters was critical. So now I've got evidence to say, here's my study design, here's my execution, and this is the justification why it's critical. And now I can go back into Polar Control, where I control all my specifications, update that specification to the new value, tell the system it's now a critical process parameter, and move on to the next study in my process characterization work. But ultimately, what this is doing, really, is it's providing the data wrapper around your entire kind of AI architecture or whatever it is you want to do. Because if you want to ask this, hey, design me a process characterization study, design me a method validation study, if you don't have this, if you don't have the product data and the process data and the experimental data, if all you're focused on is, well, I'm going to execute experiments like on paper on glass, for example, you don't have this, and so you'll get an answer like that. So thank you very much, everyone. And just to kind of round it off, as proof that large language models are not the cleverest thing you've seen in the world, this was done on GPT-4 originally, I think. And it still works now. So show me a glass of wine full to the brim near a clock showing an analog 4:15 in the afternoon. Now, if anyone's Googled for an image of a glass of wine or a clock on the internet, generally, we don't have pictures of glasses of wine full to the brim, and nearly every clock, it will be pretty much kind of, what is it? 10 to 2 kind of thing, because apparently it's the prettiest form they need to be in for a catalog. So, if you ask it something specific, it doesn't know what that is. So based on the training data that the algorithm has, and this is GPT-4, this is a huge model, 10 to 2, that's not full, 10 to 2, not full, not full, not full, not full. Can't do it. It literally can't do it, right? There's an entire subreddit of people fine-tuning models to try and get it to do a full glass of wine. And then, obviously, GPT-5 was released a few weeks ago. Well, it's no better. And it's no better. So you can have, and then as Ken kind of demonstrated earlier, you can have the best train, you can have the best transform and the best mechanism, the best learning in the world. If your data set is no good, your final result is no good. And there's this one, this is the only interesting one. This was Claude at the very bottom here. And it managed to get it because it's actually a vector graphic rather than a diffusion model, which I thought was really interesting. But that's the closest we've ever got. I mean, the clock's much better, and the wine is full, but it's not really an image, it's a vector graphic. So, thank you very much, everybody. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Mark. Wow, you made it clear enough for me to understand, and I'm in marketing, so thank you very much for that. Questions? I'm sure there are loads. No? Also clear? Oh, Ken! Okay, first of all.
Hey, thanks for that. Yeah, you speak about like getting the data AI ready. How do you think like an organization can also be AI ready? Because I think like one thing we think about it is just like, yes, of course, data's got to be structured, but the organization's got to be set up to like succeed to like take this, because it is like a digital change.
I mean, one of the things we're looking at the minute as well is kind of making sure that the data when it's in the database is actually RAG accessible. So we might actually start storing vectorized data in the first place. But that's just from a system perspective. I think the question more of how does an organization become AI ready is a much more kind of complex system. Because we had Kurt talk, the very first kind of presentation we did about how do you validate all of these things. So I mean, if an organization wants to get into this, and especially as you get closer and closer to your BLA submission and after, your organization has to be willing to accept that kind of, there's always going to be a level of risk within the kind of the generative space, at least, around, well, how can I eliminate hallucinations? How can I give it the freedom to answer and eliminate hallucinations kind of thing? So you've got to be willing as an organization to be a little bit more experimental with it, be a little bit more kind of daring, stick within the regulatory requirements that they need you to do, but kind of prove it. You know, regulations are great. They're never black and white. They're always great. There's always kind of room for discussion in these things. And it's your job as kind of the expert in this area to have those conversations with QA and things like that to kind of allay fears in this as well. Because one of the reasons why we did this today was because it is a massive topic. And just saying AI, just in the word itself, can actually be terrifying. And it's kind of enabling you to then break it down into these steps and say, well, actually, okay, well, we might be just doing image classification. Well, that's AI, but that's an AI that I can really see what the model is, and I can see what the algorithm's trying to do, and I can validate that in a simple way. If I'm going to move down to generative, how am I going to do that? How am I going to make the organization comfortable with it? So I would say, actually, does it differ from the initial change curve we went through 15 years ago when everyone went digital in the first place? You know, get your first adopters, get them loving it, have the conversations, breed confidence, slowly but surely kind of roll things out to your organization that can benefit them and actually benefit them, not things that are just, hey, look how cool this is. Because for all I'm a data nerd and I really like the cool things, you know, you've got to show your boss that you're making them some efficiency saving or some, you know, some money at the end of the day.
Yeah, that makes sense. Also, I want to say is we're down the road from OpenAI, and this was one of the best ways I've seen them do it, and I was like, this is awesome, because I was like, they would struggle to like explain it, and I was like, this is one of the best ways I've seen this.
I went to my kid's school about 6 months ago to teach a bunch of 9-year-olds about classification models and large language models, and this was the lesson that I designed. And I was slightly terrified of doing it in front of adults because I thought it might be harder than doing it in front of the 9-year-olds. So
Oh, it was great. It was awesome. I was like, wow, this is amazing.
More questions? No? Well, I know Ken wants to add something, so.
So Mark and I trade off on giving this presentation. I'll be doing it again in a couple of weeks in Germany. To drive home the importance to everybody in this room, right? Everybody here, if you're not personally involved in an AI initiative, I guarantee or I'm sure you can point to the people in your companies that are working on AI initiatives. And where we heard yesterday at the beginning of the conference from Kurt did such a great job of laying out from a regulatory perspective, the concerns of our regulatory agencies and how they're approaching our abilities to validate or not be able to validate our AI solutions. What's really interesting is where the industry as providers of AI, where they're going with this. And Mark mentioned, he had on his slide, we have a bullet there for GPT-5 is optimized for RAG. Well, there was a lot of brouhaha you may have heard when GPT-5 came out. A lot of people were really upset. Well, one of the things they were upset about is GPT-4 was trained with 1.8 trillion parameters. GPT-5 only had approximately 600 billion. So they literally cut it down by 2/3 the amount of parameters they were training the model with. But what they did is it's kind of saying, hey, industry, you know, we're taking care of 99.99% of the use cases of what people are asking us to do. We can help them design their vacations and their trips and their planning, answer questions about the movies they want to go to, all of that. But they're kind of admitting we don't have everything you need to help you answer questions like what Mark gave, help us design a study. So what they're doing is they're saying, instead of us continuing to just add and add and add, we're actually going to focus on the data that allows us to answer most of the questions most of the time. But what we're going to do is optimize our system, knowing that for you, industry, you're going to want to add your own data anyways. So they're kind of putting it on our shoulders to use a RAG system, a fine-tuning approach, to bring in our data. And what they're doing is saying, but we're gonna optimize our system to do a better job of going through the data you give us to give you better answers. So it's kind of a partner approach. But the expectation is on us. We're going to bring data to the table. I actually spoke with somebody in Boston at BPI who said, but aren't we going in the direction where they're getting so good I don't have to give it data? And it's like, no, they're actually telling us, we need you to give us data to give you the best answers possible. So just to drive all of this home on the importance to everybody here, it's very imperative that when your IT team or whoever's driving your AI initiatives, make sure and ask them, where is the data coming from that they're planning to use so that you get right answers when you ask questions of your system.
And there's if you want some bedtime reading as well, there's I think it was either last week or 2 weeks ago, NVIDIA just released a paper on using small language models, so moving away from this large language model kind of theory altogether. And the idea is that you basically have really niche agents that you train in really, really specific tasks. And then using something like MCP, you allow these agents to communicate with each other. And then you have an orchestration bot that basically gets lots of niche AI experts in a virtual room and gets them to argue the point and come to a conclusion. So that's a really, really neat, interesting kind of future of where this is going as well.
Any more questions from that sort of extra information from Ken? Yeah.
Thank you. I don't have a question. I have a comment to the question around how do organizations prepare for AI. Just in addition to what Mark had said, I think the two important things are recognizing that there's a huge change management aspect to AI. And also, there's also the aspect of upskilling. So 2024, 2023, a lot of people had POCs that are still not in production and are still not providing the value they should be providing. And the reason is because with AI, it's mostly driven by the IT, the product team, the engineering team. But what's really required is for cross-functional change management. So your sales team, your finance team, your HR team, your legal team being acquainted with with AI. And also what's important is actually investing in upskilling the people within the organization to understand what AI is. And I think that's what Mark's done really well today, where he started with educating us on what AI is before actually going to the topic of the conversation. I think that's really, really key in various organizations. Thank you.
Thank you. Also another question. Thanks for a great presentation. Now I understand much better what's going on. Remark. AI is a tool. It's a way of solving a problem. It should never be in a URS. I want an AI to solve this problem. No, I want this problem solved. The specialists decide how to best solve it. If it's a deterministic algorithm, that may still be the best way. But if the AI is the way, then that's the way forward.
So during the talk, we mentioned that, or at least I kind of had, it was a throwaway comment that, you know, a lot of this is linear regression done to the nth degree. No one in this room would ever write a URS that said, hey, I want to be able to do linear regression on this thing. It's just, you'll be like, no, you give that to the spreadsheet builder, and the spreadsheet builder will decide what mathematical principle to apply to get you the solution you need. And at the end of the day, AI is a mathematical principle. You know, and when I went in to teach the kids about this, and my wife was there teaching about science and physics, and she had things that exploded and went bang and these kinds of things. And I stand in front of the class and says, so what are you going to show us today? And I was like, maths. I was like, oh, I'm turned off now. But yeah, it's just maths, you know. And at the end of the day, it's the solution provider who decides which is the best mathematics to apply to solve your problem. So I completely agree. Shouldn't be in URS.
Great. Well, thank you very much for a fascinating closing presentation, Mark and Ken.
Yeah.
Thank
you very much.
you.